In this lecture, we will be reviewing distinctive features in phonology. Now, at first, features may seem like just a more frustrating, complex alternative to articulatory descriptions, but we will see that they become essential when we start building our phonological rules. Now, we'll see that most rules in phonology can be generalized to a specific type of sounds called a natural class. Now, to use an example from Spanish, we can see the change that b will become v after a vowel. Now, we also see the same kind of change with d becoming the after vowel and g becoming g after a vowel. Now, instead of saying that we have three separate phonological processes going on here, we can generalize that voice stops become voiced fricatives following a vowel. Now, more specifically, we can use features to describe this. So we can say that a consonant that is plus voice minus sonorant and minus delayed release becomes plus continuant in the environment of after a vowel. Now, as you can see, we need features to build this rule, and we will go over these features. Now, you may notice that some of the features I mentioned in the previous rule sound exactly like articulatory parameters. Namely, plus voice correlates exactly to voicing. However, I also mentioned sonorant, delayed release, and continuant, which are perhaps more obscure. These three features all relate to manner. Alright? So there are generally three parameters for consonants and three parameters for vowels, four if you include tense for English, and each of these parameters has features associated. Now, voicing is perhaps one of the easiest of the consonant features. If a consonant is voiced, it will carry the feature plus voice. And if it's voiceless, it will carry the feature minus voice. Now recall that the convention on an IPA table is for the voiceless sound to appear on the left and the voice sound to appear on the right of a pair. Alright, so p is going to be minus voice, but is going to be plus voice. Now, whenever we deal with place, we have three broad place features, and each of these carries a greater scope than the places of articulation we're normally used to. So, normally we're used to saying bilabial, labiodental, dental, alveolar, palatal-alveolar, palatal-velar, and glottal. Now, when we're dealing with features, we can consider both bilabials and labiodentals to be of the feature labial, alright? So these are going to be considered labial. Now, place features don't carry a plus or minus because they're considered to be not binary. Now, dentals, alveolars, and palatal-alveolars are considered to be coronal. And this is because they are articulated with the tongue in front of the palate. And finally, palatals and velars are considered to be dorsal. Dorsal meaning back, because they are articulated on or behind the palate. And just note that glottal sounds like h are considered to have no place of articulation. Now, For the coronals, we need to further distinguish between dentals, here, alveolars, and palatal-alveolars, as we can see that English contains fricatives for each, the being dentals, the being alveolars, and the being palatal-alveolars. Now, we need further features within the coronal feature to identify these. So to do this, we can say that palatal-alveolars, so sh, zh, ch, and zh, are more toward the back, and so we can consider them to be minus anterior. We call the anterior means front. So sh and zh can be considered minus anterior. So these are minus anterior, whereas the rest of the coronal sounds are plus anterior. Now, to distinguish between the dentals and the rest of the coronals, we can use the feature strident. So we can say that dentals lack a strident or hissing quality that is prevalent of alveolar fricatives such as s, the, sh, and zh. So we can say that th and the are minus strident. Now be careful, because t and d are also minus strident because they don't carry that kind of hissing sound. So to summarize, using these two features, anterior and strident, we can fully distinguish between dentals, alveolars, and palatal-alveolars. And remember that we can only use these two features under the coronal feature, place feature. Now, manner of articulation is closely related to how consonant-like or vowel-like a given consonant is. Now, vowels can form the nucleus of a syllable. To use a feature to distinguish between vowels and consonants, we can say that vowels are plus syllabic, whereas consonants are minus syllabic. Now, there are 6 main manners of articulation that we can rank by sonority, and we need 5 features to distinguish between these. Now, IPA charts will often vary in the order in which the manners of articulation are displayed, but the general order based on sonority of a consonant is that stops are the most consonant-like, followed by affricates, fricatives, nasals, liquids, and finally glides, which are the most vowel-like and appropriately thus also named semivowels. Now, 3 of our manners can be singled out quite easily. Affricates are the only ones that carry the feature delayed release, which is most often used to distinguish them between stops, which are minus delayed release. So we can see that we normally use features to distinguish one natural class from another. So here we're trying to distinguish affricates from the other manners of articulation. So the affricates ch and j here are plus delayed release. Nasals, which we have here as m, n, and ng, are obviously plus nasal, and the rest of the consonants are going to be minus nasal. And finally, slightly unintuitively, we can consider glides to carry the feature minus consonantal. Now, this distinguishes them from all the other consonants, which are plus consonantal, but don't forget that glides are still considered consonants. Remember, the feature that distinguished between consonants and vowels was plus or minus syllabic. Right, so these are the glides. Now, sonant is a very common feature that splits the consonant chart into half. All right, so everything above this line is going to be an obstruent, so minus sonorant. So our stops, affricates, and fricatives are minus sonorant, whereas nasals, liquids, and glides are plus sonorant. Now, what sonorant means is basically free airflow, similar to a vowel. So nasals, liquids, and glides can be considered to be more vowel-like and are therefore plus sonorant, whereas stops, affricates, and fricatives are more consonant-like, minus sonant. And it's noteworthy to note that obstruents and sonorants are keywords that describe the natural classes of minus and plus sonorant. Now, if we look at the manner features we've used so far, we've isolated affricates here, with plus delayed release. We've isolated nasals with plus nasal. And we've isolated glides with minus consonantal. And since liquids, so l and r here are liquids, they are plus sonant. That distinguishes them from the stops and fricatives, which we have yet to isolate. So we need one more feature to distinguish between stops and fricatives. And the feature we're going to use is continuant. Now, this has a more complex distribution, but its key purpose is to distinguish between the obstruents. So fricatives will be plus continuant, since you can continue a fricative sound, s, whereas stops and affricates will be minus continuant, since these sounds can't be continued in the same way, b. So in summary, these are the features for consonants. Now, they're highly relevant when we're making phonological rules, as we can see if we revisit our Spanish example, with b, d, and g becoming v, th, and g after a vowel. So the natural class we see here are voice stops becoming voice fricatives. So here we can use the feature plus voice. And now we need to specify the manner stop. So we can use the features for the manner of articulation stop, which we've described as minus sonorant, minus continuant, and minus delayed release. This feature description describes the natural class of voiced stops. Now, since we're saying that these voice stops become voiced fricatives, and fricatives are also plus voice, minus sonorant, and minus delayed release, we can say that the only change is that they become plus continuant. So in this case, we can choose to remove continuant from the left side of the rule if we consider it to be redundant. So a consonant that is plus voice, minus sonorant, and minus delayed release will become plus continuant in the environment after a vowel. So the features for vowels are far more straightforward. Intuitively, the feature for backness is back, and the feature for rounding is round. So we can see here on the vowel chart, toward the right side of the chart is back. And usually you'll see a pair. We don't really have rounded and unrounded pairs of vowels in English, but generally the vowel on the left is going to be unrounded, whereas the vowel on the right will be rounded. So for example, I and U are an unrounded and rounded pair. Now, the only trick here is with height. We need to distinguish between three heights. So high vowels, intuitively, will be considered plus high. Our low vowels will be plus low. And the mid vowels will be neither. So minus high and minus low. Now recall that for English, we also include tense as a parameter for vowels. So the feature plus and minus tense will be used to distinguish between tense lax pairs. For example, I and I. So I is going to be plus tense, whereas I will be minus tense. And finally, with schwa, this appears only in unstressed syllables of English, so it can be considered to carry the feature plus reduced, whereas all the other vowels are minus reduced. So it's very helpful to have these features internalized because you will need to be able to recognize a natural class of sounds when making phonological rules. However, a feature matrix is something you can fall back on in case of any doubts.